This video is produced for the University of Vechta and made with help from For Crying Out Loud, Zinneke, and Sir Francis Productions. Learn more in the description below. One can study language in many different ways, on the level of sounds or on the level of whole sentences, as well as everything in between. For the purposes today, I will be mostly looking at phonetics and how class affects the way people speak. The effect of class on language can be seen in just phonology, that is, the individual sounds, but also lexicon, i.e., one's selection of words itself, and syntax, essentially grammar. Of course, many of these definitions for class are flexible. If someone gains or loses money or an impressive title, his speech will not instantly change in order to account for this. The tricky thing, and the reason why this will require a bit of background information, is that there isn't anything inherent to something being low class. One way of speaking can have prestige in one period of time, for example the rhotic R. Think of the American R. R. This had prestige in Elizabethan England, but has since lost it in modern Britain.
R.
Class relates to language insofar as people have social classes, and people of those classes speak differently. In fact, class is more present in the social consciousness of the British public as opposed to the American public, which results in far more class variation in some ways. For clarity, I'll say that a social class will be defined as, going forward, a measure of the social organization at the level of the larger speech community. Indeed, what tends to happen is that language is picked up first from one's parents, and then one's accent is influenced by one's friends at approximately 8 years old. If that person only hears one way of speaking, that will almost certainly be what that person will use as an adult. Even so, class can relate to education, job, wealth, cultural capital, or parents' education or job, or of course, all of the above. This is especially noticeable in smaller communities, particularly when the community is centered around one industry, like mining or fishing. This can happen anywhere, whether these people are rich or poor, living in a city or in the countryside, or anywhere. Isolated communities will likely see the most contrast in accent, but this is not the only way that dialects change. One thing that can be true no matter what the reason is that accents are related to identity and community. If somebody sounds like me, I'm more likely to trust him. If somebody sounds different to me, it means that we are not part of the same community. This may sound very tribal, but it's true. There are three main ways that people develop accents. Number 1. People mimic accents. Sometimes this happens on purpose, but most likely it's subconscious. Higher status speech will be more present in the media, education, and will therefore be more advantageous for travel. People will gravitate towards it, especially as populations continue to urbanize and travel further afield. Many times, this will be more socially or intellectually advantageous as a way of getting ahead in industry, or even just being taken more seriously. People often assimilate their speech, even without realizing. That's the situation for individuals, but for real lasting change, that can take generations. There is strong evidence that change in language towards what is perceived as higher status is led by women, particularly young women first. For instance, it used to be normal in Britain to use the rhotic R, like used in America, car, or Scotland.
Car.
Over time, people began to adopt it, beginning in the southeast and radiating northwards, first in cities, and then eventually the majority of English people used the non-rhotic
R.
Anyway, whilst there is a tendency for people to adopt traits that are associated with high status or less rural speech, there is a major exception to this. 2. Group identity. Sometimes the opposite happens, where a group of people will not only identify with their way of speaking, but also overemphasize certain elements. For instance, a traditional feature of East Anglian English is that the third-person singular present verb lacks a tense marker.
I run, you run, she run, we run, they run.
Or alternatively, the northern subject rule, wherein the tense marker s is added to plural present verbs
They runs.
in certain contexts as opposed to an omission.
They run.
These are both considered to be historical carryover from Middle English, but all of these are decreasing in usage overall and are no longer as useful at distinguishing dialects. As a result, two things happen. It is observed that younger people have more or less abandoned this when using it as a signal for identity. More importantly though, other features, including phonological variants, are emerging in new contexts. For instance, th fronting, the difference between
With,
and,
with,
or,
brother,
and,
brother.
has existed in some form or another in Britain for a long time, but is now becoming more of a working class phonetic feature. Likewise, the suffix ing changing in some dialect to
In,
or even
ing,
in Liverpool, rather than traditional
ing,
these alternative forms are seen as holding lower status to.
ing,
This is because it's appearing in places which are working class, but had not traditionally had these phonetic features. This, and many other examples, corroborate the idea that as people gravitate towards usually middle to upper class speech, group isolation helps to reinforce the entry of these low-class phonetic traits. 3. People adapt to where they are. The final point is particularly true of politicians or other public speakers, and they may not even realize that they do this. However, since sharing accents indicates membership to a certain social group, the opposite, having a different accent, can actually make people less trusting. These days, in the UK, the differences between the North and the South are increasingly less stark, and instead the differences between rural and urban dialects are becoming more notable. That said, there are some dialects, or in this case sociolects, like Multicultural London English. MLE, while based in London and Essex, is associated with immigrants and ethnic minorities. In addition to having th fronting and using the suffix
in,
there are many other phonetic and syntactic distinctions. For example, th stopping in words like
thing,
into,
ting,
or indeed,
tin,
as well as many other vowel shifts including the monophthongization of
ear,
in words like
fierce,
these are all associated with lower and working class people. Be careful though, because class and dialect are not always related. For instance, a small loaf of bread can be called so many things around the UK, including
bap, cob, balm, tea, cake, muffin, bun, roll, batch.
This isn't necessarily going to have the same sort of relation to social class, even though it will certainly relate to region. I want to thank the University of Vechta once again for endorsing WordFacts. Links for the daily blog and the Patreon are below, and make sure to subscribe for updates if you haven't already. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.